Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through one main story. And this one comes from our friends at the New Republic. It's talking about Meta and their rule changes towards the free speech policy and reorienting some of their previous behavior. And of course, we will end today still with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. Is Meta's change, is free speech the central issue that they're actually addressing here? Or are they possibly trying to placate an incoming regime or an incoming president? That's a possibility, and I want to know your opinions down there, because lots of these people who don't like Meta and they don't like the change that they've made, changes they made previously, are saying, oh, okay, they're actually changing their ways. They want to believe in them. And some people who are more cynical see it only as a power move. I want to know what you have to say about it. So that out of the way, I'll address one other thing, which is I am a little bit quieter now. I have to boost the levels of the audio in the back end. So hopefully I've fixed it all and you didn't even notice. But if I am a little bit quieter, that is why. So with that said, the first thing I want to talk about is the title. Meta's dangerous rule change has unleashed some vile new content. Now, of course, the New Republic leans to the left, and there's no doubt that people on the left have been more okay with content moderation, especially from some of these companies, because they see them as allies for their causes, or at least useful tools, useful idiots in some cases, in order to implement their agenda and to force their perspective onto other people, or at least to provide a safe space for different communities that they feel are not necessarily loved in the eye of the public. And this is where they first go with one of their first comments in this article. And I'll read you this second paragraph here. Quote, some of the recent changes have dropped the digital guardrails on controversial topics such as immigration, race, gender identity, as well as language around the LGBTQ plus community, including allowing users to suggest that being gay is a mental illness. The last detail has sent some of the company's own employees into a rage, according to internal conversations obtained by 404 Media. End quote. So this idea of being able to limit what people are able to say on any of these given topics, on top of the fact that we could expand this beyond that, and it could be any topic, is that inherently outrageous or not? Because this is the value assumption. If we're going to really cut through the BS here, and let's be clear, we will address the BS and some of the fluff behind this issue, because they're important questions as well. But the key premise, the keystone premise, honestly, that holds up either argument is, are you allowed to say whatever you want, no matter how it makes somebody else feel? Versus, are you supposed to be kind and generous, and when people aren't, there needs to be rules in order to enforce the perceived best way to operate, especially on a social media platform. Those are the two key premises. Are you allowed to be a person who may not be enjoyable, may be an absolute rife idiot and vulgar and vindictive maybe in the way that you go about things? Or do you have to be hemmed in? Do we have to live in a society where the worst of us are cut out and ostracized? And it's actually a very interesting argument on its fundamentals, because even the most ardent free speech advocates nowadays, which there are some on the left and some on the right, probably would agree that there is an underlying rule within any given society that is operational, functional, and succeeding, that shame and ostracization should not necessarily be off the table. You should be allowed to say, hey, we don't like this behavior. We're not going to allow you into our friend group. Or not allow, but we're just not going to have you out as much. You violate the rules of our given community, so we're not going to give you the benefits of being part of our community. That is shame and ostracization. That is not inherently liberal in value, at least, or in value's sake, because or at least maybe not necessarily inherently liberal, because you can still do those things, and I'm saying liberal here in the classical definition of the word, not the new age meaning. But The point I'm getting at is that is not inherently liberal in that everybody live and let live. There are rules and ostracization and shaming, all of those things that would not necessarily be a mindset of, yes, you can do whatever you want and it will be okay. Everybody should just accept you. Then again, you could argue that it is liberal and that they can do whatever they want. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have to shape to their worldview, shape to how they act. That is fair enough. Now, it reaches a different level in the era of communication over social media because no longer are you simply saying, we're going to ostracize you because, hey, we're going to ban you from this place. But there's an argument to be made that these are the public squares. This has been an argument that's made for a long time. But even if it's not the public square, it is the location where thoughts are formed. That is even more important. If you actually ask yourself what Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all these different companies, all these different social media platforms are actually good at, it is shaping culture. It is about bringing alternative perspectives or even similar perspectives to the front of your feed, to the front of your lobes, your brain, honestly, because these are the cultural chambers in which ideas are bred. And are we allowed to cut people off from that? That is the question that comes down to free speech. Are you allowed to actually stop someone from being a part of these conversations, being a part of the cultural experiment or the culture setting location, aka the public square previously, nowadays, social media? I don't think you should be able to. I think that these should be places where the gnarliest and nastiest of things are allowed to be said. Guess what? If people don't like it, they won't subscribe to it. If people don't like it, then they will not give you the engagement that is going to get them more attention. And guess what? Maybe it's apparent on a fundamental level, we like outrage. We as a society, not even as a society alone, as a species, we like something to be a little bit frustrated at. We like to have a little bit of conflict. Some people don't find that in their everyday lives. They're not combative with the people around them. They're not pushing back and they have an outlet online. Maybe they just like the sensationalism. And even if you want to argue that we should not be encouraging those sort of behaviors, which I agree, we should not, that doesn't change the fact that it is underlying. And just like any bad behavior, just like anything that is bad for you and causes you to spend too much time and energy spent on it when it is not actually benefiting you, you have to learn to cut it out. Social media is very low usage in a lot of the circles that I'm not saying that I run in specifically, that my friends run in. And that is something that I never thought I would have seen when I was younger. That doesn't mean that they're cutting out social media. It doesn't mean that they're banned from social media. They're making an active choice to not engage on social media. But they have the choice. They have not had their ability to do so limited. And that is what is extremely important in this conversation. Being able to ban people, being able to directly limit their ability to change the culture is not okay. To affect the cultural, I would even say timeline. That's probably the best way to put it. It's analogous to the timelines on the social media companies. You should not be able to limit their ability. They should be directly able to limit their own usage, of course. But you, as a company, aka Meta, aka as a person who has issues with anything that's said on any of these platforms, like the New Republic is pointing out here, to imply that you know the best way, that you know what can and cannot be said, that you know what ideas should be allowed and are not, is not only the largest act of, or one of the largest acts of narcissism besides declaring yourself God and trying to run the world as with everybody as your puppets. It is actively hurting the goal that you're trying to reach, which is a more inclusive place, but also a place that can withstand hatred. What happens when the arguments of, this is actually very interesting. I think there's a great example from TikTok not that long ago. The arguments of Osama bin Laden. They were arguments that the letter itself was posted online after 9/11. And it was cited as one of his justifications for doing the terrible acts that he did. Most people in my generation had not ever read the letter that Osama bin Laden had written. Let's be clear, I had not until it had resurfaced. I knew about it. I knew what it said in theory, and not in theory, in actuality. I had a summary of it, and I had learned about it, and I also done my own research, but I hadn't read the entire thing. Some people in my generation had never read it. And then when it resurfaced, and there was contention online that the U.S. is being overly involved and they're actively courting this sort of behavior from people who they go and invade. There was no good counterargument. This is because people had not run into this information. They had not faced this argument before, and therefore they did not have the ability to stop it, and or at least push back on it and provide some resistance. This is just like your body when you are a child and you have an overly clean house. You don't deal with certain levels of certain types of bacteria, viruses, and your immune system is weakened. You have not built up antibodies to deal with any of these different diseases. And that is not to say that certain type of speech is a disease, because that would actually lend credence to the idea that we should cut it out, but rather to say that ideas spread like diseases, and when they are ones that have not been, or illnesses or viruses, when they are not properly addressed and they have not been put out in the light, it is easier to take the people who are blind to that light and manipulate them and use them. Ideas need to be put out there, and they need to be shot down by the people who know what they're talking about. They also need to be fostered by people who know what they're talking about, but they also have to be explored by the people who don't know what they're talking about. And this is why we can't live in a world of experts who tell us what can and cannot go online. That is why the narcissism of people that say, I know what is best to allow online and not, is idiotic to me. Only one person knows best, and it's not even a person, it's an entity. Whatever the being that created us is. I'm being very general here because I could have people who are Hindu in my audience. I could have people that are Jewish, Christian, Orthodox, maybe even Buddhist, so on and so forth. The point being, there's only one entity out there that truly knows what is the best way. We can have guidance from them. We can have understandings of them. We may have an agnostic view towards the universe as a conscious being, whatever it may be. But to pretend as though we are the ones that can actually set the tone and we are the ones that can manipulate these cultural centers, it's not that they can't, it's the question of should they. And it is not our place. It should not be our place, because like I talked about, these places are where culture is made. And to pretend as though you know the best way for the culture, there are obvious bads, but that doesn't imply that everything leads to that bad if it is not exactly how the one person would imply it is. And that said, I think Mark Zuckerberg made the right move here. And this is one of the quotes from his press release. And honestly, it's kind of him playing God with his own platform. It's his own creation, but it also is a leaning towards letting go of the reins a little bit. Quote, fact checkers have been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they have created. Quote, what started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas. It has gone too far, end quote. And that's exactly where it is. Ideas, opinions, they have to be heard out. We have to listen. We have to combat when they are wrong, when they are evil. But to pretend as though I can tell you what is right for you to say, to pretend that I know all, that your opinion is not valid here, your opinion is not allowed here, that you are overly hateful, no. That is not my place. It should not be any of our places. In a system that allows free speech, in a system that encourages combativeness, in a system that encourages us to engage with those across from us, shutting down the opinions simply because they don't align with your views is idiotic. I'm honestly treading the same ground here. The only new thing I think that I have brought to the table, at least that I hadn't thought about before, and it's not even that it's that new, is that this is the cultural shaper, and that it's that much more important that people will be able to speak into that giant timeline and be able to put content into that giant timeline, because they are the cultural influences of our time. They are the Times Squares, the city squares, the town circles uh, of our time, the town square. Wow, took me a while to actually get to that one. Goodness gracious. They are those central locations where we all come together. We gauge what the community is thinking. We find out the ideas that are working, the ideas that aren't. And to shut people out is only going to end badly. So, with that said, let's jump into our daily delight. I talked a lot of heavier stuff, a lot of serious stuff. Let's jump to something that's a little bit more positive. This one comes from outdoors.com, and it's a video of a grizzly basically playing around with a wolf pack. They're trying to nip, the wolves are trying to nip at the grizzly, and the grizzly's sitting there like, hey, okay guys, we're not going to play this game. Just stop. And he sits down in order to stop him from nipping at his butt. It's absolutely hilarious. If you want to read this one or see the video for the Daily Delight, or you want to read the article that I was quoting from, you can find both of those links in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every once in a while and explore some different ideas from things that I'm reading. So, with all that said, there is only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.